So welcome, my name's Damien. I'll be doing your presentation today on SOLIDWORKS Visualization Professional. We'll be covering some aspects from Standard and Professional. We have a great turnout today. We've had over 100 registrations, so we're going to get you guys to please type your questions in the question box. If we have time to answer some of them at the end, we will. Otherwise, we'll get back to you after the webinar to help answer those questions. Feel free to do that at any point in time. As we have quite a lot of visual display data coming on, we're going to run the demonstration nice and slow, so the imagery updates relatively quickly on the GoToMeeting. It will be smooth on the recording for afterwards anyway. Okay, so today let's make a start. We're going to a quick overview of what we're going to cover. As I said, we're going to be covering some aspects from both standard and professional. I'll try and highlight some of them as we go. We're going to begin by getting our model ready for the camera, get it ready for the render. So we're going to talk about how we set models up, import models, appearances, and then as part of that we're going to demonstrate different configurations. How do we build in different appearances, different models, different looks, all in the same setup, and we can send those all out to be rendered together, so we can explore different options, a lot like SOLIDWORKS configurations. We're going to move on and talk about how do we set up our scene, our lighting, the cameras, and some of the post-processing options that we can do, and again, create multiple renders in a short space of time. So a lot of the demonstration is going to be talking about how do we make, make all of our set up and produce lots of high quality photorealistic renders. We're going to talk about how do we post-process those results for cameras, adding filters, vignettes, depth of field, bloom, etc. Those types of options, where are they and how do we deal with them? And then I'm going to move on for a more involved story on animation. So we're going to create an animation of our Nespresso machine here. We're also going to discuss that we can do turntables and sun studies as well. And the final type of output we're going to look at is more in depth, a virtual reality photo rendered HTML file that lets us look around our model freely and send that to our customers or load it onto the website. And a similar type of output for a panoramic view, good for interiors or external large-scale entities. And then finally we'll discuss a tool we've been using through the demo, the render queue, briefly. So let me begin. Clearly we have a great SOLIDWORKS model of an Nespresso machine. Clearly the designer that made it will be proud and happy with what he had, but it doesn't evoke the reaction that a customer necessarily wants to come and have a coffee, needs an espresso. So what's going to be better for us is actually to evoke an emotional reaction, is to provide a more photorealistic render. And this is one of the images, or something similar to what we'll create today. This way we can actually create our marketing and visualization material before we've actually made any geometry. Okay, so I have a few more shots. All the images on here are created in SOLIDWORKS Visualize, and we're going to make a few of them ourselves. So let's begin. So here's our story, our roadmap. So we're going to start by getting our product ready for creating our photo renders. I'm also interested in looking at some variations. So often we'll have variations in color, maybe some have a different spoiler design, maybe have the fog lights on or off, different shininess, reflectiveness, roughness. All of these things can be changed and set up into multiple configurations and rendered together. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to prepare our model, we're going to adjust the materials, and we're going to catalog some of the different colors that we want for our Nespresso machine. So let's step in and create our first model. So in SOLIDWORKS Visualize, I'm going to keep the renders nice and small. We can see we've got all my recent projects inside of here ready to access, but What we're going to do is take one step further back and actually start from importing the geometry. So you can see in here I have a SOLIDWORKS assembly file. So the SOLIDWORKS Visualize environment is a launchable environment. We can drag and drop directly onto the backdrop to import geometry and make a new project. When importing our geometry from our native formats, we can include decals, the environment, any pre-established appearances, and clearly the geometry. We're going to leave ours on part grouping as automatic because this is going to make it really easy for us to update the renders when the model geometry changes. However, if we are intent that we're not going to change it, we can use one of the other groupings to make it faster to build my environment. A typical example would be group parts by their appearance. That way when we drag new materials on, they get applied everywhere that material is used. They will be overridden. Okay, once this is set, it doesn't mean we have to keep what it starts with, so it's not a problem. We're going to talk about how we can manipulate some of that later. So you can see we've pulled in our first model. Before we work with it, I just want to talk about importing geometry. We're going to take a quick look at the dialog box that shows us quite clearly many different file formats, and we can import models from multiple systems in at the same time. For example, we might have a layout of an office in SOLIDWORKS. Maybe we downloaded some Rhino files, or in SOLIDWORKS Visualization Professional, we can even import FBX files, and these can include pre-established animations from other software such as Maya or other formats. Okay, but we're going to work with just a SOLIDWORKS file for today. As you can see, as I manipulate and move around, we get a preview type window, and when we let go, it starts to render. Up on here we have three options that we can work with: a preview option, a fast ray tracing rendering option, and a accurate ray tracing rendering option. I've set mine to be blended for now, which means when I rotate and move my environment, it stops the rendering and shows the preview model. We can also use one of the other methods that will continually render it as we move the geometry. Okay, so we can leave it on either. We'll leave it in here for now, and we're going to start working and manipulating with our model. So over on the right we have our model tab, and this shows the model tree that came in from SOLIDWORKS. We can see and select items such as my screw. We'll also see that the two sides have been processed separately because the SOLIDWORKS file showed it to be that way. We can merge these parts to be one single part. Okay, this means when I drag materials, it will apply to both sides. We can also group items together for quicker animation. We're going to leave it very much the same as it is in SOLIDWORKS, and we're going to talk about setting up appearances first. So all of the appearances that were shown in SOLIDWORKS have been pulled through, and we have a choice. We can either work with the existing appearances, make new appearances, or pull them from our library. So we're going to have a look at each of those. So we're going to click. Firstly, we're going to look at our little cup here that was modeled with an appearance of acrylic in SOLIDWORKS. We're going to modify this one. Clearly we can see we get access to many different types of material models, including some more advanced ones such as subsurface and backscattering, which can be used for things like flesh or wax and other types of materials. For us, we're going to change ours to a glass material and make a few subtle changes. We could even give it a green highlight if we want, just by changing the color. Change the density, color density, if we want to bring out that green highlight. As we can see, the effect's pretty immediate. and we can work with these appearances in a pretty straightforward fashion. We can also copy them just with a shift right click. Lets me copy materials from one item to another, making it faster and easier than ever to manipulate them. So let's make some changes to the side panel. We can see this is just, again, been pulled in from SOLIDWORKS. First thing I want to talk about is the color. So we've seen we can change our slider and manipulate and make the color whatever we want it to be. We also have access to a series of favorites, allowing to choose it quickly, or we have a dropper tool. So the dropper tool actually lets me create a drop from anywhere in any window. For example, I could even come down to my GoToAssist icon, my GoToWebinar icon, and choose the color from here. In our case, or maybe just this orange, and we can see the preview of the dropper inside of the color window. Let's take the orange from there. Okay, we're going to use this one here because I quite like it. It's taken from our company colors, and we can see we can quickly adjust the roughness of this, making it very shiny and reflective, or we can push it all the way up and have quite a matte finish. So we get great control. Just leave it somewhere where we get a little bit of reflection, but still a bit of roughness too. Okay, so that's working with our existing materials. Next we're going to take a step over to our libraries, and we'll see in our libraries we have access to all of my local materials. We can search for them and look for things in particular using filters. We also have access to a detailed cloud asset library. Lets us look for many different types of materials, you know, even from skin or metallic paint or vivid metallic paint. For example, there's some chameleon colors in here. Any of the customer assets can be uploaded and shared on these places. We're going to just use the ones from my local drive and go ahead and add some changes. So I'm going to hide my two glass objects. We can just use the shortcut menus, and we're going to add some liquids to my geometry. So I've got a couple in here already. I've got water that we're going to use at the back. I've got a liquid espresso that I've already done. I've also got a foam, but these can be made in very much the same way we did the other two materials, and quickly added and changed to my model. So let's move down my list and just grab some more. We've got chrome in my model, and again this can be copied and pasted quickly from one object to another. I have a favorite folder. We can organize these folders however we want. This one here happens to have some yellow pods, and let me just zoom that back out 1 second. And we've got blue pods, or predetermined, just to make my life a little bit quicker. And you'll see if I drag and drop them multiple times, we can actually change those independently from each other if I choose to. It's going to come down and just do the last few from the plastic. I'm a fan of a semi-gloss. It's you know, really nice finish. The smooth black also works quite well. Again, we can copy it from one part to another and to another. Okay, and we're just going to zoom in quickly, and we're going to add a couple more. We're going to add a molded textured plastic onto this top piece, and we're going to spend a bit of time modifying and changing this too. So back to my appearances, we can see a number of appearances, the ones we've been added, including the yellow pod twice. We can right click and unify all those appearances the same. That way when I update them, they will all update. Or we can process them independently of each other. We can also copy either using Control-C, and we can paste other appearances. For example, maybe we had some other metal appearances we want to be chrome, and apply them over the top. So it's quite quick and easy to manipulate and reorganize my materials, and we can delete anything that's not used to simplify my tree just down to a handful. Okay, so let's take a look at this molded plastic and see what we can do with the texture. So in our texture we have a full array of textures that can be mapped: colors, specular reflections, our alpha channels for transparencies if we want transparent materials, and our bump map. So we're going to take a look at this one. Has a bump map, and it can be mapped in a variety of methods, either using the underlying geometry as UV or box mapping is probably the simplest. We can bump our strength up and change our tiling to make it more obvious. This gives us a bit of an indication of how this works. Clearly this will be too much. And pull this back down a little bit. Okay, so to make changes and make our own materials, we can save these out whenever we want. It's just a matter of making changes to any of the existing ones. So the bump map can be reassigned. As you'll see on here, I have taken the courtesy to download an image off the internet of a pattern that we can see inside of a sunflower head. I have taken this into Photoshop and just cropped it pretty roughly. We can use either the black and white, the grayscale, or the normal map. The normal map's more computationally efficient. So as you can see, we've now applied this more spiraling effect to it. Okay, and again, we can choose to tile that, make it bigger or smaller, make it more obvious. Okay, we're going to go back to the one we had, and we just had a molded plastic, so nice and simple. Let's pump that up a little bit. Okay, and as we can see, it reses up quite quickly as we're watching. You'll notice at the moment I'm actually only doing my rendering with my GPU only. I've done this to try and help the GoTo session. So my CPU is primarily going to be used to display on the GoTo meeting. And all the rendering currently is done in our GPU. But we could have a hybrid where we use the CPU and the GPU, and it would run a little bit faster. Okay, so before we look at our variations, we're just going to do one more thing, and that's going to make a decal. So decals can be added quite quickly from image files and created, and they can be dragged and dropped onto my geometry, and we can scale and move them however we want. I'm going to have my depth just go pretty small so it only goes on the outside. We can manipulate these and scale and move and pivot using our standard tools that we see for all of our geometry. Making it quick and easy to add decals, and they can be saved out. Again, we can apply appearances such as chrome to the decal, so it's like it's a chrome label if we want to. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do is we're going to just explore 3 separate configurations before we create some final renders. So what I said I was interested in is getting feedback from the customer at this point in time. What sort of color would we like the sides to be? So at the moment we have a single configuration. This is a professional feature that we can make new configurations. So I'm going to make 3. I'm going to have one called orange, and we're going to have one called green, and one called charcoal. Okay, so we can flick between each of these. The orange is orange. The green, we are going to take the existing side panel. We're going to go Control C and V, just copy the appearance. We can see it down here and call it green. And we can drag and drop that quickly onto the sides. Okay, so then when we make our change, we can just make a slide, and we see dynamically as we make our changes, what do we get from the different types of colors. And we can tweak and change this until we get the color that we're really after, which looks great. And then we're going to copy and paste, oops, just once. And we're going to make this one charcoal. So when we flick over to our charcoal configuration, we can just drag and drop our charcoal on and tweak the color on this one. We're not going to dwell on this too much. We're just going to see how we can make it a little bit lighter or darker or something around about here, nice and dark. Okay, so that's my setup done, and we can flick through our orange, green and charcoal. But what is interesting about this, these configurations we made, we still have our underlying base configuration. And only the items that have been changed in those sub-configurations will change. So for example, if we were to take a different color onto the handle for the base configuration, we'll see that each of the green and the charcoal and the orange all inherit the change that we pushed through. Okay, so it's very versatile, very quick and easy to make those changes and carry on working like we want. So at this point in time, I'm happy with my setup as my quick look, and we're going to go to our output tools. I'm going to create our first render. So this snapshot here just takes a quick JPEG of the current rendering, how far it's got. This one actually lets us create a render. We can choose our file formats, our resolutions, and the renderer. So we got this full accurate ray tracing, which is going to yield the best result. The fast ray tracing stops at 100 passes, and the preview output. So we're going to work with our high quality. We can see how we can choose to render it CPU, GPU, or a mixture of both, which is going to yield the fastest results on this particular machine. Rather than me rendering it now and consuming the resources of my machine, I actually want to carry on working and create some more renders at this time, or maybe I want to work in SOLIDWORKS. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to send it to a render queue. So by sending it to a queue, it would send this one shot to the queue for a render, but we're actually going to choose to send all configurations. So all of our configurations that we made will be sent to the renderer and queued up in the render queue, which is great. Let's just let that pop up. So we can see our render queue here. Shows us it's going to be performed on this machine. In future versions, I'm pretty sure we can farm that out to different machines, and it tells us the type of rendering it is. So let's leave that there, and we're going to render that later. We're just going to return to our PowerPoint for the next part. So we have set up our materials. We've tried multiple designs with configurations. We have see some results of our choices: the orange, the green, and the charcoal. And the feedback from the customer is that they like the charcoal design. So we're going to carry on and make some more detailed outputs on the charcoal. So stage 2, we're going to set up and talk about lighting, setting up cameras, and some of the post-processing options associated with that. Okay, so let's go ahead and choose the charcoal. This is the one we're pretty pleased with. we're going to carry on working just with the fast rendering option because it works quite well for the demonstration. And we're going to move ahead and look at the next tab, which is the scenes. So in SOLIDWORKS Visualize, we'll see if I zoom right out, we can see the HDR environment actually pulled into my model, and we can manipulate, work with it, or create new ones using HDR Light Studio and directly inside of here. We can also create a sunlight environment. Lets me choose the place and time that we want and time of day. Actually can create quite a cool environmental changes. This one here was the HDR environment that came from SOLIDWORKS because we chose to include it. It comes with it. As you can see, we can manipulate and change its brightness and settings directly inside of SOLIDWORKS Visualize. Or we can change to alternate studios such as this Chrome Studio. Or again, we're going to utilize our libraries, either cloud or local, for environments. So we can see we can put a classic kitchen or maybe a retail store and change and manipulate that. I quite like the white panel, so this is the one we're going to use. Incidentally, this file, if it updates, as it updates, actually will update your model dynamically at the same time. So let's come back and have a look. We currently have this one active. We can do a number of other things with our scenes. Maybe we'll try and explore a little bit right at the end, flattening the floor and looking at some scenes of some more less studio-like environments. But this works well for this one. Okay, so let's make some changes to the scene. We're just going to brighten it up just a little bit, maybe a little bit more. That looks pretty nice. We can also change its size of the environment and a number of other things, but what I really want to do is just tweak, we can tweak the rotation, see how it rotates and the reflections change, and I'm quite relatively pleased with that. That looks quite nice. We can also add our floor reflections on at this time. Okay, so it can work really nice to have a reflective floor. We can have it quite glossy with zero roughness, or we can just add just a little bit of roughness. Which is quite nice, maybe just a tiny bit less. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. So we can manipulate those scenes easily and quickly, and if the underlying image actually updates, it will update with it. Okay. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to have a look at our camera. Again, we've been working with a single camera, and we'll also see in our library, we also have a library of cameras. So when we have a camera set up with different filters, these can all be saved into my library. As you can see, we've got some with like a sunset filter on here and reapplied whenever we want. We're just going to work with the one we have at the moment. And we're going to just change this one, and then we're going to start making some new cameras. Okay, so the perspective and other things can be changed. What I want to do is talk about the professional options for post-processing. So some of these filters can be added. So for example, maybe some of the dark, and so if we enable our post-processing, some of the darker areas can be increased just a little bit, which will make them just a little bit deeper and richer. And we can increase our lightened areas just to make them highlight a little bit more. And we're going to add a vignette. So a vignette lets me put in a little bit of drama to the photo. We can see like an exaggerated one here. And later we'll see this, all of these entities can actually be animated as part of an animation. Wow, that looks good. Okay, so when that's on, once it's finished rendering, you can actually flick it on and off in one hit without it re-rendering. It hasn't quite finished, so it's not doing that at the moment. So we're going to look at some of the other extras. So bloom can be turned on and off if we want emissive materials to show a lighting bloom around them. What we are going to talk about is depth of field in a moment. So I'm happy with my default camera. I'm going to use my Control-C and V. I'm just going to make a new camera and activate this one. I'm going to call this one our top view. So it's really quick and easy to make lots of setups and views, and we're going to punch those all out to the render queue after we put them where we want them. So we set the top view with it however we want it to look, which looks pretty good. But on this camera we're also going to set up our depth of field so we get focusing on a particular point. The focal distance can be set on geometry with the eyeball tool, and we can change the aperture or f-stop to give us a more blurred appearance. You can see we get feedback on that straight away. We're just going to make ours a little bit less. Okay, and that res up for a moment, which looks great. So I'm going to make a copy of this, and this one we're going to call the drip tray. So at the moment it's identical to the other one, except what we're going to do is we're going to just come down and change the depth of field and focus it on the tray at the bottom. So lastly we're going to make one more, and this one we're going to call perspective. So it's a lot like we're walking around our model and setting up our cameras where we want to take the shots. Okay, and that looks pretty good. So once we have these 4 cameras set up, we're going to go back to our render tab. We can see on here, last time we sent out our configurations to the render, but this time we're actually going to send a render from each of our cameras. So we'll get 4 more renders at 500 passes each sent out to the queue. And there's our second set of renders. Okay, so in this case we've shown how we can create multiple cameras that can all be rendered together, reducing the amount of post-processing by putting vignettes and altering the output. It doesn't change the amount of time it takes to render because it's post-processed, and we're getting high quality visual outputs quickly. So we can see some examples of the higher quality ones of our perspective shot, our top view, and the drip tray. So the next area we're going to take a look at is in creating animations. So we're going to set up part animations and camera. Also going to really briefly explore animating the scene, the lighting, and the appearances. So not only can we animate moving parts, moving cameras, focal length of cameras, we can also animate the colors of appearances, the amount of light they emit, etc. Okay. So I'm going to copy the default camera again. We're just going to set this one up first. This is going to be our camera that we use to animate. I'm also going to copy it again. I'm going to have one called free. This is going to be the one I use just to use everyday stuff. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about this timeline down the bottom. We can see it can be shrunk and hidden at any time we want. I'm keeping my render screen nice and small so it updates quickly on the GoToMeeting, not because we have to have it small. And the first thing we're going to talk about is we got the selection tool. At the moment we can select items based on appearance, groups if we've made groups, individual parts, or the whole model. So we're going to start with parts, and we can see we can quickly select. I selected too many. Just the parts on here. You can control select, or you can window select as we've done. And to add animations, it's as simple as adding keyframes. A lot like SOLIDWORKS, it's pretty easy. We can drag out the end time of my animation, and we can drag out our time. But as you can see, because it's continually rendering, this is quite a good time to actually show it in the preview mode, because this can make it quite fast to set up. We're going to more easily be able to see the animations during the presentation, and we're going to show a few tricks with the preview mode, and we're going to talk about how we can bake our lighting onto the preview mode to give us a better appearance. But we'll do that at the end. So we're going to take these items and we're going to use the move tool. Likewise, we could scale and change the size and position of objects. But very simply, they get moved from the first key point to the second. We're going to turn off the ribbon bar. We're going to show that in a moment when we animate our camera. So again, just like on the items, we can right-click on a camera and add a keyframe. And our camera appears in my animation timeline. And I accidentally added it at the end, so we'll just drag the keyframe to the beginning. And we're going to move our camera just down to the front. I'm going to zoom it in. Somewhere like that, and then we can quickly see the changes that we're making as we drag the timeline. Or we can hit our play button. Okay, so that's pretty easy to make a change to the camera. We're going to add one more in just in 8 seconds. We're just going to zoom in on the top here, and we can see how we've made that change. So this is a good point to illustrate. So all our animations are part of Professional. What they also allow us to do is manipulate and work with the animations in a smoother, direct manner. So we're going to take in a second viewport so we can see how we can have multiple viewports up to 4. And in this second one, we're going to make this one free, and we're going to make this one animated. So in our free one, as we move in and out, we actually get to see the animated objects, including the cameras. So we can roll our timeline to somewhere in particular, like somewhere in the middle. We can take any of these keyframes in particular, and we can even alter their position if we want to, or where they're looking at. We can zoom them in and out. Okay, and we can manipulate them directly as we go through. What we also get to see is the ribbon in the viewport, and this shows me the smoothness and the speed of the change. So green meaning fast, orange meaning a bit slower, and red meaning that it's finishing. So as we see through here, we can see as our animation comes to the end, it stops pretty abruptly. And this is because of this keyframe here, and just double clicking on it lets us change and manipulate the smoothness of these time points. So on the way in here we can actually add, it's like what we call a little bit of tension, and as we grow and change this we can see the ribbon bar changing and understanding the movement in here. I'm just going to add a little bit of more slowness and motion in as we go in. That way when we animate it from the start we get a really good preview and we get a nice smooth motion that we're looking for. Okay, that's me done with that. We're going to hide that viewport. Just come back to a single viewport and look at my animation toolbar. So what else can we animate? We're going to do it really briefly, and we'll look at the final output. Somewhere near the end, we're going to talk about animating the scene, and I'm going to go to my scene, and we're going to add a keyframe, and we're going to take the keyframe to the end, and we're going to reduce the brightness of my scene. That way as we get near the end the scene fades out. What we can also do is skip ahead to the camera, and we can animate not only the position of the camera but the depth of field and other items, the post-processing. So for example we could increase the vignette, or let's leave that what it was. We're going to add a vignette to around here. Okay. And the same goes for manipulating the appearances. We can take something like the amber LED, go around about this point, we're going to add a keyframe, and then we're going to change the color to be red. That way we can see it, or we can make it bright or bloom or pull out. And this gives us our animation. Before we go too far, I'm going to just talk about the baked lightings for 1 second. So you can see when we select parts in my environment, I'm only going to choose just a few of them because it takes a few minutes to bake it in. We can see when I choose parts, we get a choice to bake those lighting onto the preview mode. We can have like a approximate or accurate vertex and textures. They can be added on quickly and it will bake them onto these components, make them more realistic. While that's going, we're going to take a look at an output from there. So this is playing at full speed. I'm just going to change the speed to be slower. And playback speed. Just for the benefit of the GoToMeeting, we're going to play it back at a slow speed. And we can see the output of this animation, something I did before, of a similar fashion. And at this point I changed the color of the lights and then faded them away. Okay, so the backlighting is done. It does make some difference. When we're done with our render, you'll see over here, creating renders of animations is done on this tab. We have two options. We have the render settings. So this shows me the quality, in this case done with 500 passes. You can also set it to a time limit. And the animation options gives us options about making a movie format. You can also include the alpha channel if you want to, and again, how many frames you want to go through. So we're going to send that to the queue as well. In a moment, similar things can be done with a turntable. The turntable allows us to actually create an animation without setting anything up. So it's very fast and easy. We also have the ability of adding a turntable to our models to actually have a physical turntable and have things turning on their own tables at different speeds. And we have the ability to do sun studies where we show a start and end hour and how many frames per second, show the light moving through. So we're just going to send our render out to keep on time. So we're coming near the end of our session time. And we're going to talk about the last two areas, which are a little bit quicker. We're going to talk about setting up a virtual reality environment so we can output a series of images to be mapped into an HTML file so our end users or stakeholders can look around our model. So we're going to go ahead and show how we make this. So I'm going to let's go back to my downscaled fast renderer, and we're going to go to my cameras. I just made those accidentally, but that's fine. We'll get rid of them. I'm going to take my default camera and I'm going to call this one VR. So really easy to set up. All you have to do is have a camera and then check that your camera is looking, because you'll be able to look around your model in the same way we are now. If we put this on preview mode, we'll be able to see what we're looking at more smoothly. Okay, at the moment, when I look down on the top, it's clipping the bottom, so we can choose parts and center on them, and just zoom out a little bit, put it back in the middle. I'm pretty happy with that. We can look at our camera, the latitude. This actually shows me when I create my VR, what angle do I go from 0 to 60 or to 90. So we can choose this when we go and choose our render, and we choose a VR. So this chooses our start angle from 0 to 90 or 60. The number of orbits, this shows me the vertical smoothness. The more orbits, the smoother it will be, and how many images round there do we output. Okay, so we can send that again to our queue. This is a good time to take a look at the other option inside of here, is called the panoramic view. So this works, the VR looks in at the focus point of the camera and allows you to orbit around it. The panoramic looks from your camera outward, so it's great for internal scenes or other panoramic type views. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at some of those outputs. And I actually have a Chrome document already here. So the VR environment, we can see the output that I've done before my HTML document. We can see as we spin it around, we get a really easy interface. This was done to 60 degrees. Easily loaded onto your website. The panoramic view works in the same similar way. We get a series of controls to help us look around and actually paste 6 separate large images that lets me see all the way around. And I'm going to put this to a pan just so it's a little bit, I can make it go just a little bit slower for the animation. Okay. So the last thing we're going to talk about is the render queue. So we can see ours is set up ready to go. So it shows you the VR and animation, all cameras and all configurations that we sent. So we can start this queue and stop it and run with it whenever we feel like. We get a lot of control over how we use it, and it allows us to carry on working or run it overnight. And they work independently whether Visualize is up or not. Okay, so I'd like to take time to thank you for listening. If you have some questions, feel free to send them on to me or add them in the box now. We might have a few minutes to answer any questions people have. I have a few examples from some different industries of renders that have been performed as we go through, including some architectural renders all done in Visualize. So we went through setting up our models, managing our materials, our appearances, creating multiple configurations so we can create lots of renders concurrently, setting up our scene, our lighting, our camera, our focus, our post-processing, create an animation. We discussed turntable sun studies. We can also make lights, but most of the time most people would use some HDR environment. And we looked at how to create a VR for HTML and panoramic renders, and briefly on the render queue. So thank you for listening. I will take my time to try and answer the questions that I've got. Someone asked about how do you control which configuration of a SOLIDWORKS model is imported? In fact, that's a really good question. It will import the currently active configuration. So if we go to, I'm going to show you that because I dropped it off my list, my drip tray, and I actually go and open this file in SOLIDWORKS, we can change the configuration and we'll see the renders update as we change it. Let me just find the model. Espresso Maker. Here it is. So we're going to drag this into SOLIDWORKS in the same fashion. We can make whichever changes we want. In this case, we're going to change from a slotted drip tray to one with holes. We're going to save our file. Don't need to close SOLIDWORKS. We can see it warns us that the source has changed. Would you like to re-import it and update that? Because our original setting said to import that scene, it did revert to the other scene, so we'll just pull that scene back. Okay. So that lets us import that quite quickly. So our question, SOLIDWORKS Visualize. So Visualize Standard is included with SOLIDWORKS Professional and Premium. Visualize Professional is a separate product, and they require active subscription. Okay guys, let's bring us into the time. Feel free to send questions through or type them in. I'll leave GoToMeeting running for a little while, and there will be a recording available. Thanks for your time.